What exactly is the right way to think about a BioWare game? I don't mean exactly how you think about a BioWare game, or even how I think about them, but what's the best way for anyone to think about them? Granted, any consideration we give to BioWare's catalog will have its share of subjectivity, but what if we made a best attempt at objectivity? What would that look like? Presumably, it would start by naming the key components of BioWare games across time and across the different titles, so that in the future we would know at a glance what to look for. We would take stock of the most crucial and unique aspects of BioWare games and use that as a rubric of sorts, or at least as a loose guide, to knowing what makes a BioWare game, and what that game has to excel at in order to be a great BioWare game. Hello and welcome to the Exalted March. Today, we're going to get critical. I don't mean critical in the connotative sense of the word when you're negatively picking something apart. I mean criticism in the technical sense of the word, taking apart all of the pieces and analyzing them individually. In this case, specifically, the pieces we're looking at are the elements of BioWare games that make them the most BioWare-ish, if that makes sense. There are 7 core components I'd like to discuss with you today, and at the end of the video, you should let me know if you think I got those right, or perhaps you would have compiled your own list. But essentially, these are the 7 core components of BioWare games that I think make them resonate the most as uniquely BioWare. Kicking off number 1, character creation. This one might seem obvious, but it's not to be overlooked. Character creation lays the foundation for a player-driven story. It frames the entire narrative around someone you, the player, creates. In that way, the story is yours, and uniquely yours right from the start. You can choose a gender, race, in some sense age, and even to be non-human in some cases. You can select from and tinker with a multitude of options, sliders, and presets to make your character appear quite handsome, or unfortunately strange. But either way, you get to take responsibility for whatever that character is, down to how they look. But it's not just about looks. Character creation also encompasses characters' starting background. Sometimes that's merely tied to the choice of class, such as Mage in Dragon Age Origins, or any class in Star Wars The Old Republic, but it could be a combination of backstories regardless of class, such as the 2 profile history choices that you get to make in Mass Effect 1. The choice of character background can include a unique prologue quest like in Origins, a unique side quest and dialogue options like in Mass Effect, or an entirely different main quest, such as in The Old Republic. Either way, this foundation of player choice leads to unique story content, major and minor, and that is chiefly one of the most unique aspects about BioWare games. I think it's valuable as an illustration to call out for each of our major categories a best-in-class example from the BioWare catalog. So, for character creation, I'm going to select Dragon Age Origins. This selection is owing primarily to the namesake of the game itself. The origin stories in Dragon Age Origins are still, even today, some of the most unique content in gaming. Having the ability to play several different unique prologues based on your choice of character, and not strictly decided by class, for instance there are 2 separate origins for Dwarf and Elf, was unprecedented and still currently unrivaled. For this reason, along with the other race or class-specific options you see throughout the game, and the general robustness of the character creation system itself, I take Origins as best in class here. Number 2 is dialogue choices. Now, it's worth noting that this easily could have been taken as number 1. My defense is twofold. First, the order of these components isn't exactly strict. I'm trying to approach them logically in terms of their foundational importance, but they're all crucial. That's the point overall, is that you really couldn't have a BioWare game without any of these. Secondly, while dialogue choice is probably my personal favorite thing in any game, period, for BioWare games, the element of agency is foundationally dependent upon the character creation. So I take that number 1 if I'm ordering them. But I digress. Dialogue choice is still incredibly important to the BioWare RPG experience. It frames so much of everything else, including character development, empathy for NPCs, and really the overall story as a whole, since story is delivered in scenes where, thankfully, we the player are not passive, but active as our words and actions shape the narrative. We can go all the way back to the Aurora Engine RPGs of BioWare's early history to see dialogue choice having always been a key aspect of how they tell stories, but it's maintained its importance even as technology and player expectations about cinematic quality have evolved. We have used unvoiced protagonists in dialogue trees or branches, and now we have multiple voice actors per protagonist, fully cinematic cutscene direction, and a dialogue wheel that's meant to capture the impulsive and sometimes imprecise nature of real conversation. We can take issue with the limitations inherent to both the new and old approaches, but the key aim is still the same, to give the player the feeling that they are causing things to happen by saying what they want. You roleplay, you take the action most suited to your character, and then your actions have effects, and that's primarily how the story unfolds. The advancement of the story is, in essence, contingent upon you expressing yourself, albeit at times in the limited frame that you're given. Plenty of other RPGs have dialogue choice, but BioWare's commitment to balance the breadth of choices with compelling acting and satisfactory cinematic aesthetic gives you a different sense of immersion than any other game.
You want Mariana's little boy to grow up without a mommy, Shepard? Thermoclips on the ground now. Power cells too.
Is that it?
What?
Vasir, I sacrificed hundreds of human lives to save the Destiny Ascension. I personally destroyed the last Rachni Queen. So for your sake, I hope your escape plan doesn't hinge on me hesitating to shoot a damn hostage.
You're bluffing.
Now, Liara.
It's satisfying to see your actions play out in a way that's highly cinematic and yet still tailored by player choice. Furthermore, the robustness of dialogue choices is an entertaining aspect to explore all on its own. You don't just choose from a set number of options that are presented universally to all characters, but often choose from choices that are specific to the character that you build. You have choices that are dependent on attribute checks, like being able to choose a dialogue option because you have a high enough cunning rating, or on class, like having special dialogue choices as a mage. You can also make special dialogue choices based on race, or sometimes less often based on gender. You have certain options opened up to you because of equipment that you have on, or who you have in your party, or what alignment you've chosen, or because of special abilities or powers you've upgraded. And you can lie. Although it hasn't been as present as it was in earlier titles, BioWare has been known to allow the player to experiment with truthfulness and lying, often garnering satisfying results. Giving the player the option to not be truthful is more complicated than it seems on its surface, since, if offered consistently, it would eventually lead to the player being able to completely break the plot, but when used sparingly and strategically in just the right spots, it can lend a sense of naturalism to a scene that may need it in particular. For a best in class here, I'm going to select Dragon Age Origins again. I actually think Dragon Age Inquisition is underrated in this category because it does have a fair bit of unique dialogue choices that can be unlocked, but overall, the greatest breadth and width of dialogue options probably has to go to Origins. Origins allowed for an incredible amount of latitude in role-playing and gave an exhaustive amount of choices without making you feel overwhelmed or like you had to go down a list and check off each one of them. The dialogue choices felt broad and natural all at once. Number 3 is your party. Again, this is one that could have easily been put at the top of the list. The party is essential to the BioWare RPG experience. It's arguably one of the things they still do universally better than everyone else. Even when BioWare falters in the eyes of the general gaming public, like with Dragon Age 2 or Mass Effect Andromeda, there is invariably a bright point in the form of a few cast members everyone seems to love, like Varric in DA2 or Drac in Andromeda. The party is the quintessential BioWare element that taps into your empathy and attaches you to the world through some of its most colorful and endearing inhabitants. In all BioWare RPGs, you have several party members, and the group you get as a whole can always be taken as diverse and unique. You'll get all sorts of classes, all sorts of temperaments, all sorts of backstories, alignments, religions, fictional nationalities and races, and even some various levels of trustworthiness. Characters all have their own unique stories, and specifically their own unique quests. They develop as individuals, and although they can be quite different from your protagonist, if you establish and grow a good relationship with them, you can often influence who they become as people. Outside of your one-on-one interactions, companions will also interact with one another, as in Garrus and Vega swapping war stories and trying to out-brag each other during some downtime on the Normandy in Mass Effect 3.
But if you're suggesting I'm scared, game on, Vega.
Age before wisdom.
Okay.
Or Alistair and Morrigan bickering humorously throughout your journeys in Dragon Age Origins, just to name a couple of examples. You can ask party members for their input during crucial story moments, or they can also interject at times to volunteer their own views if it's on a topic they feel particularly passionate about. Wider gameplay can also be affected by their presence, such as their ability to unlock new sections of a map, or to perform certain puzzle-solving activities. Best in class for this category goes to Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 had a large, incredibly well-written cast that is also mostly optional, and also entirely perishable. Your entire squad, Shepard for that matter, can die in Mass Effect 2. That's not only unique among BioWare titles, it's unprecedented as a whole. You can get the entire cast killed and essentially lose the game, but still complete it. Squad mates can live or die based on their relationship with Shepard and whether or not they're loyal, but can also live or die based on your planning of the final mission. Neither of these are a given, and not necessarily single-faceted either. Despite common perception, loyalty missions are not the only factor in loyalty in ME2. For instance, Tally's loyalty can be lost even after successfully completing her loyalty mission if you choose the wrong dialogue option following a conflict that she has with Legion. And Zaid's loyalty can be won even after what appears to be the deciding moment in his loyalty mission. For that matter, squadmate loyalty doesn't just affect that individual squadmate's survival chances, but also it can affect the likelihood of other squadmates surviving as well. For example, choosing someone who is ill-suited to lead the second fire team on the final mission gives other squadmates in that fire team a lower chance of surviving. And loyalty factors into the overall equation of survival chances at the point when your team must hold the line in the final mission. All of these wrinkles, and just how optional all of your squad interactions are in ME2, make it by far the most robust handling of a party in a BioWare game. Number 4 is player choice-driven story. Again, this is a factor that is obviously a given, somewhat already touched on in the first 3, but also oddly another potential candidate for being given the number 1 slot. That all said, it merits space to be discussed on its own. It's related to the others, and also enables the others in many ways. Character creation can be inconsequential to story, party members can be static rather than dynamic and reactive to the player, and even dialogue choices can become hollow if they don't amount to meaningful differences to the plot. In all BioWare games, there are multiple endings. There are differences to the endings of individual quests, and there's interaction between quests, including major intersection in the main quest. And a lot of times, the decisions that you're given aren't merely a binary choice between clear good and bad. Moral grays are often at work. In one Mass Effect 1 side quest, you have to choose what to do about Corporal Toombs, a former Alliance Marine and potentially a former comrade of Shepard, depending on the background you choose, who has taken Cerberus scientists hostage as retribution for terrible experiments they performed years earlier. You can choose to spare but arrest the scientist and get Toombs' help. You can be forced to kill him. He can end up killing himself. You can let him kill the scientist, or you can kill the scientist yourself, robbing him of personal retribution, but sparing him the ramifications of his actions, since Shepard has immunity as a Spectre. BioWare also makes use of really satisfying devices like delayed consequences. Sometimes you don't know the full weight and impact of your choices until much later on in the game, or even into later games in the series. For instance, the choice you make in a squad loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2 regarding research data from Morden's former assistant Malin ends up being a crucial element in part of a main quest in Mass Effect 3. The ending of Dragon Age Origins, from your relationship with Alistair to who rules a nation, can be significantly influenced by how you chose to respond to Alistair's reaction to a personal quest several hours earlier in the game, even though at the time, it couldn't have seemed feasible that either of your reactions would end up affecting who rules Ferelden and how. Best in class is a tough one to select for this category. Essentially all BioWare games have strong elements of choice affecting the plot. However, one in particular stands out, and that's Knights of the Old Republic. KOTOR is unique in that your ending can be full-blown evil. You can straight up end the game by becoming the bad guy. You can choose to join the dark side, convince Bastila to join the dark side, which we'll come back to in a second, and then attempt to lay conquest to the galaxy. That's insane. You can't try to rule the Geth after you defeat Saren in Mass Effect. You can't just take up Corypheus' place at the end of Dragon Age Inquisition. This kind of total 180 is not often seen anymore in BioWare games or games in general. For that matter, being able to totally 180 another character, potentially your love interest in the game, is also really unique. Bastila turns to the dark side regardless as part of the story at one point, but that's really only for a moment. You as the player get to decide if she truly embarks on the path of the dark side or returns to the light. This would be like someone romancing Alistair in Origins and convincing him that it would be a good idea to get rid of Honora and then after killing Loghain, just take over his nefarious plan for yourself. Wrap your head around how crazy that sounds. Now, for Dragon Age Origins, I have to give an honorable mention here. The main quest lines can intersect in major ways in Origins. I'll never forget the first time I was in Redcliffe having to decide how to deal with Arl Eamon and my ears pricking up when one of my companions said what we really needed was a bunch of mages, knowing full well that there were a bunch of mages in a place that had been referenced but not yet visited on my first ever playthrough. I was ecstatic when I realized I could drop this major portion of the main story to go fulfill another, and then upon completion of that other major arc resume the one I left with a new possibility opened up. It was, and still is, brilliant, branching player-driven story. And there's a lot more of that in Origins also. The Sacred Ashes questline is also optional and potentially can have a huge impact on Liliana's fate. The conflict between the Dalish and the werewolves has multiple resolutions despite seeming on its surface like a binary conflict. And the entire Landsmeet ending has a myriad of potential outcomes, including multiple configurations of who rules Ferelden, who, if anyone, partakes in the Dark Ritual, who lives or dies overall, what's done with Loghain, and what happens to Alistair. It's a bit of a cheat to pick two choices here, so I'll say KOTOR as best in class and Origins as the honorable mention. Number 5. World building and rebuilding. You'll notice here that I opt to include the word rebuilding alongside world building. That's because I feel that the macro level changes, the big world-shifting events that can take place in the middle or towards the end of a saga, can be just as enriching as the lore of the initial setup. Too often, I think we concede the point that the best world building is always in Mass Effect 1 or Dragon Age Origins, and that the sequel games could never measure up. But in reality, it's some of those later games where the world is most notably being shaped. Yes, it's true that when you think of world building, you think about the initial rules of the world being laid out, and those rules seen in action when surveying the landscape of major institutions interacting in the world. When you see the superior ship technology of Turians being silently leveraged as part of their overall political power in the Mass Effect universe, the lore behind Mass Effect technology is seen at work, and that feels like thorough world building. That political and military might led to strong economic power, which all combined to allow the Turians to contract lead Solarian scientists to invent the Genophage, a bioweapon that the Turians then used to cripple and defeat the Krogan. This all happened well before the events of Mass Effect 1, and the player learns about them slowly during Mass Effect 1's ancillary moments. But in Mass Effect 3, that imposing and illustrious Turian fleet becomes crucial to retaking Earth from the Reapers. In order to secure Turian support, however, Shepard will have to broker an alliance between the Turians and, you guessed it, the Krogan, joining together old foes in a truce. In order to successfully do that, you'll need to cure the Genophage, or surreptitiously enter into a deal with the Solarians to sabotage the cure and trick the Krogan into an alliance. This completely reshuffles the setup of political alignments from Mass Effect 1, and in a really satisfying and challenging way that has drawbacks no matter what you choose. That is consistent and persistent world building, or simply world rebuilding. And BioWare games are oftentimes really good at it. To really drive home this point, we need to jump straight into best of class choices. For this, I go with Dragon Age Inquisition. In Inquisition, you choose the ruler of a nation from 3 rivals, with once again some unique variation on that choice. The player themselves is at the center of a major new institution in the Inquisition itself, rising to power. A potentially supernatural occurrence has shaken the foundations of a major religion. The Templar Order is disbanded, and the Circle of Magi is either gone or significantly reformed. You get to choose a new divine. The Grey Wardens in Ferelden and Orlais are forever changed, and Elven society is upheaved by the emergence/rediscovery of an ancient elven god walking among them. I mean, damn, if that's not world building, I don't know what is. I already mentioned how sophisticated world building is in ME3, so I'm just going to reiterate here as I make another honorable mention. The Quarians also retake their homeworld in that game, and you potentially broker a truce between the Quarians and the Geth, which is huge in terms of world building. Major players making macro-level changes that shift and shape the power structures of the world, and sometimes even change the rules of magic or technology, as long as it's done in a believable way. That's world building, and it's not just done in the first game of a series. Number 6. Gameplay party dynamics. Okay, we're getting a bit further down the list now, and while I'm sure some might wonder what specifically makes this so essential, I assure you, this is a big part of BioWare games, even if sometimes we go into autopilot on this one. Gameplay party dynamics mostly means that party composition matters. It matters to gameplay and not just story, who you bring with you. At the most basic level, this means you need a good mix of classes. You need rogues and warriors, biotics and tech specialists, soldiers and mages. Also, it means that this eclectic collection of comrades work synergistically, combining their unique abilities for extra damage and debuffs. Furthermore, meaningful gameplay party dynamics means you need strategy. You'll likely need to control or issue commands to all of the members of your party, and you'll need to carefully spec them out with attributes and abilities that complement your own. Again, the best illustration here is just to jump into our best in class, which is Dragon Age Origins. Origins requires party strategy. While you can get by and beat the game without it, you're not really going to have a good time ignoring it. The game can become frustratingly difficult without party strategy and team building, but soars to new heights when you realize exactly how powerful a synergistic party is. Party positioning on the battlefield is also key in Origins, and while I think Inquisition does at least as good of a job for rewarding you on good positioning, Origins can really punish you for bad positioning. Warriors holding choke points, rogues flanking, and mages in the rear ranks either healing or dealing AoE attacks is essential to avoid frequent and repeated death. Mass Effect 2 gets an honorable mention here, primarily because I love that most of that squad is optional, but also because ME2 started the detonation feature that has since become the staple of Mass Effect combat. You prime an enemy with one type of attack and then detonate with another, delivering extra damage and potential AoE status effects. It also gets honorable mention because the final mission is a great blurring of the line between story and gameplay, and the role you assign your individual party members greatly influence that mission. Finally, number 7. Core RPG mechanics. Similar to number 6, you may question if this aspect is truly crucial enough or unique enough to warrant inclusion on our list, and I assure you it is. BioWare RPGs would not be the same without this. In BioWare RPGs, your character build matters. More recent games aren't as punishing as older titles like Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter Nights. You're a lot less likely to make a poor character build so that you end up non-viable or seriously hampered as you finish the final quests, but it's still meaningful. Similar to engaging or ignoring with party tactics, you're either going to really enjoy certain portions of combat or feel really frustrated. Your attributes do matter. Your class does matter. It matters if you're deliberate and consistent with your skill tree choices when unlocking new abilities. Your gear matters, both to complement your strengths and to shore up your weaknesses. In some earlier BioWare games, and now again more recently, material gathering and crafting matters. And that means exploration is incentivized even more, even outside of just story-driven curiosity. For all of its open-world design flaws, looking around for more crafting materials in Inquisition because you genuinely need better gear and the best gear isn't sold, that loop works. I'd also like to dispel the idea that core RPG mechanics are no longer at play in modern BioWare titles. That couldn't be further from the truth. They're at play differently, and I'm willing to concede that ignoring them is less punishing than it used to be. And they are certainly more hidden so as not to be intimidating to new players. But they are certainly not gone. They're definitely still at play. Dragon Age Inquisition often draws this criticism because unlike other Dragon Age games, you can't select your core attribute point distribution at the start of the game or when leveling up. Not directly anyway. You can't control your attributes at character creation outside of class selection, which pre-slots you with a vanilla attribute point spread, but you can indirectly spec out a particular build by chasing passive abilities which also come with attribute boosts in the skill trees. I never really thought of this as a character build strategy initially, but upon subsequent playthroughs I have noticed it makes a big difference to quickly go after passives that boost your magic attribute as a mage, for instance, even if you only end up unlocking a couple of actual damage dealing abilities. Likewise, even if you don't have a lot of offensive abilities as a warrior, chasing passives that boost constitution nets you a large benefit by increasing survivability. Likewise, Mass Effect Andromeda drew criticism because it eliminated set classes and instead opted for a fluid class system in which you can change loadouts on the fly, changing both your equipped abilities and the core set of passive bonuses that you have. Somehow people thought this meant that character builds no longer mattered in Mass Effect. But I really wonder if those people even played Andromeda, and if they did, were they any good at it? You still have to make good decisions about what class you play in Andromeda and what kind of build you create. You just have to make more of those decisions, make them more frequently, and recognize different factors which affect your decision. If you're playing against groups of Remnant, which are tech-focused and often shielded, a pure biotics build is not going to do well. Not unless you offset it with effective gear, perhaps. But ideally, you want at least a competent tech or infiltrator build to take down Remnant. If you're fighting exiles, you normally have your pick of how you want to take them down, but if they break out a giant mech suit, you're going to want to go with a heavy damage dealing soldier build. Biotics tend to do well for crowd control and for dealing with Ket. All of these strategy decisions still exist. They just exist at different intervals, battle to battle instead of level to level. And of course, as we near the release of Anthem, people have once again restarted the chants of, "This isn't even an RPG. This isn't even a BioWare game anymore. EA is killing..." Okay, listen. We know enough about Anthem to know there will be multiple damage types, multiple status effects, combos for both damage and status effects, variations to movement speed and flight time based on class, environment buffs around water, buffs for hovering, combination buffs for using certain abilities in certain sequences and in conjunction with each other, and combining abilities cross-class. That's not exactly Call of Duty combat now, is it? I'm willing to admit that Anthem looks like the least RPG-like game BioWare has ever made, except for their first game ever, which was a mech simulator that no one ever seems to remember, but it still has strong roleplay elements to it. And being able to shift class as simply as changing javelin suits isn't necessarily a bad thing. If anything, it's more concrete than the loadout profiles of Andromeda because you won't be able to do it mid-mission. You'll make a strategy decision at the start of the mission, and then play that out with your teammates. No, it's not an isometric CRPG, and we'll have to rate Anthem on its core RPG mechanics or lack thereof when it comes out. I'm just using this to illustrate the point. Even when BioWare admittedly does something different, even when they try to break the mold, it's still discernible as BioWare. Despite what everyone says, the BioWare core mechanics are evolving. They're changing. They're not going away. And when Dragon Age 4 comes out? Well, if you haven't noticed, a lot of the best-in-class choices on this list were Dragon Age. Dragon Age 4 and all future BioWare games will have a lot to live up to. But also, I think we've still got a lot to look forward to. This has been The Exalted March, a discussion about story and mechanics in games. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to this channel so you can keep up with all future content, including coverage and analysis of Anthem, Dragon Age 4, and whatever comes next for Mass Effect. I also have a streaming channel called Codex Added where I stream weekly and do a bi-weekly podcast with fellow YouTuber Gilder Thalin on all things BioWare. As always, thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.